this were to pass, if we were to treat marijuana like alcohol in the state of California, 6 things would happen. 5 of them demonstrably beneficial, then we'll talk about the 6th. The first thing that would happen is in California alone, we would save, as taxpayers, hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion, every year that now we're spending in a futile effort to eradicate marijuana as well as to prosecute and incarcerate nonviolent marijuana offenders. And by the way, does anyone here know what the largest cash crop is today in the state of California? It is marijuana. Number 2 is grapes, by the way, if you care. So you go driving along Highway 5 or in Sonoma County or Napa or wherever else, you see these miles and miles of vineyards. Understand marijuana is a larger cash crop even than grapes. So we could save those hundreds of millions of dollars. Number 2, we could tax the silly stuff. Now again, that's not a reason for doing it, but it really is a nice side benefit. And don't ask me, Betty Yee, who at this moment is the chair of the State Board of Equalization in California, which is basically the tax arm of the state government, has estimated through her agency that we would generate about $1.3 billion in tax revenue every year in the state of California alone. So now that is a change of our budget deficit of about $2 billion every year in the state of California. You'd think someone would notice. By the way, last time I looked, we do have a budget deficit. This would help. Okay, that's fine. But number 3, this is the reason to really look at to do it. And that is, like we discussed, it would make marijuana less available for children than it is today. We've already discussed that because basically marijuana dealers today, unless you're involved with a medical marijuana issue, do not ask for ID. Number 4, this is huge. It's always a sub-issue, kind of an anecdote, but it's really important. We could re-legitimize the entire hemp industry. Now, what is hemp? Hemp basically is the stalk of the marijuana plant. It has no THC, no mind-altering properties whatsoever. It also can be the hemp seeds, by the way, and those can be jerry-rigged, so they really don't have any mind-altering properties either. But it goes back, the word, just think of this, the word cannabis in ancient Greek was literally the same word as the word for canvas. It was interchangeable. And in fact, you go back to the old Ironsides, the USS Constitution, its sails were made from hemp. The rope, the twine, were all made from hemp. It's a viable product, and we could talk, we don't have time limits here, but I could talk the rest of the time about the valuable hemp industry, and we could really shake our heads in amazement. Suffice it to say that you can get 4 times the amount of paper pulp from an acre of hemp as you can an acre of trees. And by the way, it takes a season of somewhere between 8 and 9 months to grow the hemp and 20 years to grow the trees. I'm told, and I couldn't track this down, but I believe that diesel engine, Mr. Diesel, actually created this engine to run on hemp oil. And I actually was on a talk show out of Iowa one time recently, and a farmer came on and said, I'm going to speak against my own economic self-interest here, but hemp works a lot better for ethanol, for making gasoline, than corn does because it won't clog your carburetor, and you can get more ethanol per acre of hemp than you can an acre of corn. So all of these things, we could revitalize that industry. And by the way, we do use a whole bunch of hemp in California and elsewhere in our country, but we import it from those radical countries like Canada and England. This is a $1 billion a year crop in Canada. They very much appreciate our having hemp illegal because it simply contributes to them. So that's number 4. Number 5, this whole medical marijuana issue could get a lot more under control, get a lot more regulated, and have a lot fewer problems. And I think that would be, on all things, a good thing. So then, that's number 6. Let's talk about this one. What's going to happen, you economics majors? And by the way, if you don't understand simple supply and demand, you can't be an educated person in society today. So people, at least I say that in college, and it's true. You've got to understand simple economics, the invisible hand, etc. What's going to happen if you have a demand for marijuana, and all of a sudden the price is lowered by 50%, which you'd have to do to run the illegal dealers out of business, and it's no longer illegal? What's that going to do to demand? And the answer is demand will go up. Marijuana usage for adults will go up. I understand that. That's pretty logical and straightforward. All things being equal, but all things are not equal. So maybe after 6, 12, maybe even 18 months, we're going to start experiencing what I call the Holland phenomenon. Holland decriminalized marijuana decades ago, back in the 1970s, and according to the Minister of Health of Holland, he looked at us and said, we only have half the marijuana consumption in our country, both for adults and for teenagers, as you do in your country. Half the marijuana consumption in our country as yours, both for adults and for teenagers. And he went on to explain why. You know what he said? We have succeeded in making pot boring. There's a message there, because we glamorize it by making it illegal. We glamorize it by having an enormous profit motive to get you, your neighbors, and your children started on all this stuff. So if you glamorize it, just like the Portugal experience, we will probably eventually reduce the drug usage down to where it is now. Or maybe not. You know, if you had a loved one, and you only had two choices. One is to have that loved one abuse alcohol, or the loved one abuse cannabis. Which would you prefer? Which is less harmful? The answer to that is easy. Yes, cannabis, marijuana can be dangerous, but it's far less dangerous, honestly, than my drug of choice, which is alcohol. And today, by our laws, think of this, by our laws, we are forcing people up the drug ladder. What do I mean by that? If you have reason to believe that you're going to be drug tested, this is a Friday night, you're going to go to a party. And, you know, I don't care. You're on the high school basketball team, you're an airline pilot, you're on parole. One reason or another, you have good reason to believe that you're going to be drug tested, but probably not at least until Monday. Message. Use cocaine, use methamphetamines, don't use marijuana. Why? Because anybody that cares realizes that the methamphetamines, the cocaines in their body will be non-testable. They can't detect it after about 72 hours. So you're going to be pretty well off by doing these drugs instead of marijuana, because that will stay detectable in your system for about 30 days. Well, that's a really stupid policy. I mean, if it just comes down to it and your only choice is use methamphetamines or use marijuana, everyone agrees marijuana is less dangerous. But now we're pushing them up the ladder. So if we were to change this by passing this initiative, I have full confidence that a lot of people whose drug of choice really is marijuana would come down the ladder and would use marijuana again instead of taking these other drugs. And that would be a net gain. All of these things are really important. This is one of the most critical elections of my lifetime. Once again, I appeal to everyone here listening, every thoughtful person, give consideration to supporting this Proposition 19 in California to treat marijuana like alcohol for adults, and contact anyone you know in California that can vote and recommend that those folks do the same thing.
You know, one of the things that I think has kept our drug war in place is the poverty of our political discourse. I'm reminded of a quote by Ambassador William Brownfield, our former ambassador to Colombia, who said that we Americans are a simple people, we like simple answers. And unfortunately, that tends to be true. And if you look at the way we talk about, you know, the Eskimos, the Inuit, have some 24 words to describe snow, because snow is important to them. And yet we say democracy is important to us, and we only have 2 words to talk about democracy, Democrat or Republican.
Or libertarian.
And if you dare vote libertarian or Green Party or anywhere outside of that spectrum, these 2 narrow points in this broad political spectrum, you're viewed as not a realist, right?
That's going to change by thunder.
I hope so. But if you look at the human course of human history, every society has found a different way to organize its politics, its culture, its society, from totalitarian fascism on one end to anarchism on the other end. Every society has done it differently. We're only allowed to think about these 2 little points in terms of conventional wisdom in Washington. And that carries over into the way we talk about drug policy. Either you're for zero tolerance and prohibition in the drug war, or you're accused of wanting to sell heroin and candy machines to children.
Sure.
There's a whole spectrum of regulatory possibilities that we're not allowed to talk about. And unfortunately, we like to think in simple terms in the U.S. We like to think of who are the good guys, which team do we root for, candidate A or candidate B, party A or party B. And we're not allowed to talk about all these shades of gray or the rainbow of the spectrum of possibilities. Now, we've talked a little bit about marijuana regulation in Prop 19. How would you talk about the harder drugs? What kind of regulatory model should we have for that?
Again, the thing to do is to allow each state to decide how best to serve its people, and then we'll find out. I mean, what do I know? I have my own opinions. I hope everyone starts generating their own opinions. And like you say, we have as a necessary ingredient, a mandatory ingredient of our present policy of drug prohibition, a prohibition on discussion.
It's not about justice, it's not about agenda, it's not about mobilizing people, it's about dialing for corporate dollars. These two parties have sold the U.S. government and the American people to the highest bidders.
Drugs are bad because if you do drugs, you're a hippie, and hippies suck.